Appreciate being on this stage today. It's my hometown, and I live down the street. I'm 3 minutes away, basically, and our clinic is down in Gastown. We take a lot of pride in working hard to solve problems and try to fix people as fast as possible, and try to educate on what's happening with your bodies at any given time. And there's a lot of things that I'm going to explore today that can bring some light into some questions of why this stuff's happening. People will come into the clinic, what's going on? I don't know why I have this neck pain, or I don't know why I have this heel pain, or I don't know why this shoulder hurts. And sometimes it doesn't really make sense if it just comes out of nowhere. But if we're looking into the history and we look into some patterns, we can piece this stuff together. It's a big puzzle. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some of these questions of why. So if you look at this, the image up here, we basically appear out of nowhere and we come onto this earth, and that in itself is a question. But we start to develop. And if we're left to our own devices, we have these inborn reflexes. They learn how to get themselves up, and we don't really have to get in their way. They know how to do it cross-culturally. Everybody has the same patterns built in. And if we do give them some help, it's great. If we take them out of these patterns, it can be a little bit of an issue later on in life, potentially. So at some point in time, we end up stalling. And the question is why? Why do we starting this slow decline? When we hit our peak, how does this peak stop? And what are some reasons why this peak is stopping? And medicine has been studying this for not even that long in our history, and we can test our hormones to a certain degree. We can train power and test speed, and we can test neurological strength. But there are some questions as to why this is happening. And today I'm just going to share some information that I've been coming across and been very interested in. And as you see, as the aging patterns continue, we end up turning into these kind of protective balls, ready to fall, protecting ourselves to fall. So there's a lot of things at play. There's the vestibular system, there's your sensory motor system, there's your vision. And these are all things that we look at in our clinic. But what we want to do is to investigate. Sure, there's a lot of technology that we can add on to ourselves, but what can we do with what we have already? And this stuff gets really interesting when you see how this brain's working. So I did some research on it and came to this one really impressive study that showed that there were, I think, 82 papers in the literature. And these papers were all showing different conditions, sciatica, migraines, low back pain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and how those map on the brain. And they're a very, very clever group out of Turin, Italy. If you want to see the paper, I have the reference on my next slide. But what they ended up finding was that they could group these conditions together, and they created a similar map on their brain. And they had 3 different groups where they could map not just decreases in gray cell mass, but also they find that there's increases in gray cell mass too in the brain with chronic pain. So I'll show you the image. We have this, and this all has to do with chronic pain. So they selected 32 of these studies out of the 80 because it had to fit certain criteria. And they mapped all this information onto the brain. And what you can see is that there's areas that are red or yellowy red is areas of decreased cell mass in your gray matter. And then the blue and towards the green is increase. So just by the definition, the Association for Pain, they defined chronic pain as, this is really interesting too, it's pain persisting over the healing phase of an injury. So if we think about this, the tissue's healed, but they're still experiencing pain. So we have to think, okay, so the tissue's healed, they're experiencing pain, what can be going on here? So this is starting to, we're going to problem solve this together a little bit. And what we come up with for the next slide, and actually one of the things that's interesting to look at is that if you look at some of these decreased areas, there's a lot of decreased areas, and these are 2 different categories, the one on the left and the one on the right. They found that there was a little area there in the anterior insula that was very close. There's one area that was increasing, one area that was decreasing. They realized they're from two different categories. So they split it just to show like, that's one category of pain, and then that's another category of pain. So, but both show some similarities in a way. But the one on the top right, you can see that there's a lot of decreased cell mass in the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and it goes over to the somatosensory strip of the brain where there's decreases of cell mass too. And you won't see it on this image, but it splits the brain a bit and it shows some more of the cell mass on the inside of the brain. And there's more increases in the limbic areas. And there have been some research on limbic system, limbic hijack. Has anybody heard of limbic hijack? Limbic hijack is coming up as like as a term where you're stuck in this primitive brain state where you're very emotional, and your emotions become incorporated into your reality, and we lose the objective measures of reality. But to you, if you're experiencing this stuff, you don't know. It's just your reality. So us right now sitting down, we could be affected by this stuff and not even really know it. So this brings us to the next question. So if the brain is getting peppered with this changes in cell mass, like what are these signals that are changing the brain? And there's another concept called central sensitization, which I'm sure people here have heard of, maybe not. We'll go over it a little bit. Basically, what this shows is that you have your tissue damage, you have your inflammatory phase of the injury, and some sensory nerves in the area they can get lit up. And even though the tissue's healed, the brain's still getting signals saying that it's injured. And the brain says, I guess I'm getting injured. So what does the brain do when it thinks it's getting injured? It tries to protect us. It's a huge protective organ, and we have to understand that is happening too. So I went on about this. I call this like a pain echo or a neurological type of a graffiti. It's a signal you can't feel. It's affecting your brain's protecting. And one of the things that we're looking at in terms of like theories of like what happens is that the brain doesn't contract your muscles. Your brain actually shuts stuff off. It takes less energy to do that. Like if your Achilles tendon gets ruptured, your calf rolls up. It's not opposed, so that's the default. So we're looking at this kind of an idea of motor inhibition. So we have an injury, and this could be 15, 20 years ago we're talking about. You could have this knee injury, and patients in my clinic like, Jeff, I don't understand why I have this shoulder issue. We go back through history and say, okay, you have this knee injury, you have this foot injury, you have this hand injury. Is it playing into how your brain's perceiving what's happening right now? Is it an ancient signal that your brain's still protecting? And in a lot of cases, it seems, I'm very clinical, it seems because we can make big changes working on old stuff. So here we go. Brain goes into this big protective mode, and it will create these patterns. Now, we've all experienced these patterns too. It doesn't have to be physical. It can be a traumatic experience. It could be almost getting run over by a car. You'll have these reflexes where you have startle reflex, and your startle reflex is when you have a experience of shock and your brain wants to protect and your wrists extend. If you go in slow motion, you're going to step away and your hands are going to come up and you're going to protect your neck, you're going to protect your abdominals, and you're going to protect your genitals, and you're going to drop. And this is a protective mechanism that can be stuck, and it can be stuck for a long time. A good example is this. I was able to, when I finished my schooling at CMCC in Toronto, my brother and I ended up consulting with the Chinese speed skating team. We were in East Berlin at this old sports complex called the Sport Forum. Just there for sports. Their bathroom was a disaster. They didn't have any water fountains, well-used equipment, bent bars, all that. And we were hanging out, just doing some exercise, and we had this big group of guys walk in. And I've played sports with some fairly large guys. I remember being in the huddle with the Stampeders, and you see the offensive lineman, and he's up to here. And I'm not that big, but these guys are humongous. And these guys would walk into this gym in Germany, really muscular, and then they started doing max squats. And they get under the bar, and there'd be the stand. They'd get underneath the bar, and they'd stand up. they'd pull the bar onto their shoulders, and they'd squeeze down, and they'd pop back up, rack it, and the coach would be like, good, 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 good. And brother and I were watching, we're like, I can't wait to see what happens next. Who's next? Because you're hitting your 1 rep max. And player after player would continue on. These guys ended up being sprint cyclists. And this one poor guy ended up being the last guy. Big afro on him. He walks under the bar. He's more lean. He gets under the bar. He pulls it onto his shoulders. He gets back. He's kind of shaking a little bit. He drops into a squat, and then the first thing that happens is his knees collapse together, and he drops down on an angle, and his knees start exploding and cracking and rotating like this, and he gets up, and he somehow stands up, and he racks the bar, and the coach is like, good, 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 good. But he was stuck, he was in a protective pattern. He was in a startle reflex, and it shows when you're stressed. This stuff will show when you're stressed. So when we're doing assessments with people, we're stressing them and seeing how they respond. So that's one example, and this is the pattern here. You can see that it is one major pattern that we can see. There's different ways that it can show up. It can show up on one side of the body or the other. There could be other patterns where someone might come into the clinic and say, Jeff, my shoulder hurts. I haven't been really doing much. I went back to the gym, but I don't know what I did. Go back in time and try to figure out some information. And even if you step on something sharp at one point and your body's reaction is to obviously lift your leg off the sharp thing, to look at your foot, you have a reflex to externally rotate your hip that way. It can stick around. Pull that sharp thing out of your foot and you keep walking, but your body's gonna shift your weight off your foot. So over time, your shoulder's not gonna follow through and your shoulder's gonna get inhibited. And if you're trying to do some work overhead, because the shoulder protective pattern's more like this, if you're trying to do some work overhead, you have all these muscles shut off this way, and then you're trying to lift overhead. What's gonna happen? Your joint's not stabilized well, and stuff's gonna go bad. So that's some other stuff that we're seeing. When we have this brain protective mechanism kicked in from a process of pains coming up from tissues that aren't even injured anymore, and the brain's being affected by that, that's an issue that we can work on. So there's stuff that can work on this process, but there are some basic things that you don't need any technology for. And I'm gonna ask you guys to do 3 things. So the first thing I'm gonna ask for you to do is, this is ways to unlock your brain. That's not the icon I hoped it was there, but that's okay. Attention. So what we wanna do is we wanna bring our attention to things that are far away. If you all have your feet on the ground, I want you to pay attention to the bottom of the soles of your feet. And I want you to see if you can feel any tingling on the bottom of your feet. Anybody feel any tingling in the bottom of your feet? Some are, some don't. Okay. We've been taught that tingling may be bad. Tingling, it's like, do you have diabetes? Right? Tingling, do you have a neurological condition? But tingling isn't bad. I want you to keep feeling your feet. I want you to close your eyes. And I want you, I don't know how these seats are here, or I don't know if they're hard or not, but I want you to put your head over your pelvis. And when you breathe in, let your head get really light. And when you breathe out, put all the weight back into your hips so that your head's kind of bobbling over your pelvis. And keep paying attention to your feet. And we want to see if this tingling starts to move. We tend to be afraid of this stuff, but you want to let it travel. Remember, the brain's all wired, all strange. The stuff that we're perceiving isn't actually fair, is not always true. So I want you to pay attention to this, okay? Keep breathing, head gets light. When you breathe out, weight goes to your pelvis, feel your feet. When you're breathing in, we usually have black spots in the back of our back. We don't look at them in the mirror ever. So I want you to breathe into the upper back. When you breathe into your upper back, your head gets light. When you breathe out, weight goes to your pelvis, feel your feet. See if the buzzing changes. It might increase into other areas. This isn't bad stuff. This is fine. We want to increase your movement inputs. We want to be doing this when we're standing, paying attention to it. We want to be doing this when we're laying down in bed. We want to be doing this when we're moving. There's a time to think, and there's a time to feel. It's really hard to do both at the same time. When we're stuck in this limbic system, we're thinking all the time. And you want to get out of it. And we want to increase more information to your brain that's real. We've got to update the reality of your system. And that's what this talk's about. It's about understanding that there's ways to update your brain. There's a lot of studies that need to be done to help to bring this concept together. But using the information and the technology that you have in your sensory system can really help. As you're sitting here and doing this exercise, sometimes your back will get sore. It'll start to burn. It'll start to get really tired and fatigued. Go through it. Don't be afraid of this discomfort. It's fine. It's normal. It's training. And we do a whole process like this type of exercise at our clinic. And we're trying to kind of raise a bar of learning how to deal with dysfunction and trying to retrain the brain on normal movements and where we should actually be at this stage of our development. So that's my talk for today. The time has run down. Thank you all for listening.